The night was silent, yet his mind was anything but. Ethan sat in his dimly lit office, the glow of his laptop screen flickering against his tired eyes. He was an expert in his field, a strategist, a problem solver, the kind of man people looked up to for answers. But lately, he had been at war with something far more powerful than any external challenge: his own thoughts. For years, Ethan believed that his mind was his greatest weapon. It had brought him success, wealth, and recognition. He had built his empire on sharp decisions and relentless focus. Yet, as he stared at the empty document on his screen, a strange feeling settled over him: doubt. It crept in like an unwelcome visitor, whispering things he didn't want to hear. You're not as good as you think. What if you fail? What if this is the moment you lose everything? He shook his head, trying to push those thoughts away, but the more he resisted, the stronger they became. His mind had become his own enemy, feeding him fear, hesitation, and exhaustion. He had heard about this before, how even the most successful people could fall into the trap of their own thoughts. But this was different. This felt real. It felt personal. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. The city lights stretched endlessly, each one representing a person chasing dreams, fighting battles, overcoming struggles. He had always been in control of his work, his time, his decisions. But tonight, he felt powerless. That's when he remembered something his mentor had once told him: the mind is like a wild horse. If you don't tame it, it will throw you off and drag you where you don't want to go. He had nodded at the time, believing he understood. But now, standing there, he realized he had never truly grasped its meaning. A buzz on his phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was an old friend, Michael, a man who had faced failure head-on and rebuilt himself stronger than ever. The message was short: "Need to talk? Call me." Ethan hesitated for a moment before dialing the number. The phone rang, and then Michael's calm voice answered: "I was hoping you'd call." Little did Ethan know, this conversation would change everything. Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. "Michael, I don't know what's happening to me." His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, a silent plea for help. Michael didn't respond right away. There was a pause, a thoughtful silence on the other end of the line. Then, finally, he spoke. "Ethan, tell me what's going on." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, staring out at the city below. "I feel stuck. Like my mind is working against me. I've always been in control, but lately, it's different. Every decision feels heavier. Every thought leads to another doubt. It's like I'm trapped inside my own head." Michael sighed. "You're not the first person to feel this way. You think your mind is betraying you, but really, it's just showing you the cracks that have been there all along. You've spent years sharpening your intelligence, mastering your craft, but tell me, when was the last time you mastered your own thoughts?" Ethan frowned. He had spent his entire life working towards success, pushing himself beyond limits, outthinking competition. He had read every strategy book, studied the greatest minds in history, but not once had he considered that his biggest battle would be with himself. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "I've never had to think about it before." Michael let out a short chuckle. "That's exactly the problem. You've built everything with logic, discipline, and skill, but you never stop to train the one thing that controls it all: your mind. And now, when pressure comes, when uncertainty creeps in, your mind is running wild, leading you instead of the other way around." Ethan sank into his chair, staring at the screen of his laptop without really seeing it. He knew Michael was right. He had spent years controlling everything around him: his business, his routine, his future, but he had never truly controlled his own thoughts. "I don't understand," Ethan said after a moment. "I've always been confident. I've always been able to push through challenges. Why is this happening now?" Michael's voice softened. "Because confidence isn't the same as control. Confidence gets you through easy battles, but control is what you need when everything feels like it's slipping. Tell me, what's the first thought that comes to your mind when you wake up?" Ethan hesitated. He had never paid attention to it before, but now that he thought about it, he realized it wasn't inspiration or excitement. Lately, it had been worry. What if something went wrong today? What if he made a mistake? What if everything he had built came crashing down? He swallowed hard. Lately, it's fear, he admitted. Michael sighed. That's where it starts, Ethan. Your mind is feeding you fear before you even take your first step in the day. And once it starts, it spreads. It controls your decisions, your emotions, your actions. You have to take that control back. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. How? Michael's voice was calm but firm. First, you have to realize that your mind is not you. It's a tool. A powerful one, but only if you use it right. Right now, it's using you. It's like a car with no driver, speeding in whatever direction it wants. But what happens when the driver takes the wheel? Ethan exhaled slowly. The car goes where it's supposed to. Exactly. Michael paused before continuing. Now, think about this. Who is telling you that you're going to fail? Who is making you doubt yourself? Ethan frowned. My mind. And who is in charge of your mind? Ethan hesitated. I should be. Michael chuckled. Not should be. You are. The problem is, you forgot that somewhere along the way. Ethan let the words sink in. He had spent years building systems, strategies, plans, always thinking 5 steps ahead. But when it came to his own mind, he had let it run on autopilot. He had never questioned where his thoughts were leading him. Michael's voice broke the silence. I know what you're thinking, Ethan. You're wondering if it's even possible to change this. If you can turn it around before it's too late. Ethan closed his eyes. Yeah. Michael's tone was steady. You can. But only if you're willing to do what most people won't. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. And what's that? Michael's response was simple. Take back control, before your mind takes it from you completely. Ethan didn't respond right away. He knew Michael was right. He could feel it deep inside, that quiet realization that the battle he was fighting wasn't against his circumstances or his career. It was against the one thing he had never truly learned to master, himself. But how? Ethan opened his eyes, looking back at his laptop screen. The document was still blank. His mind had been so full of thoughts, yet not a single word had made it onto the page. Michael's voice cut through the silence again. Ethan, listen to me. You're at a crossroads right now. You can either keep letting your mind control you, or you can step up and take control of it. But you have to decide. Ethan knew that decision wasn't as simple as just saying yes. It meant rewiring everything. His habits, his thoughts, the way he approached every challenge. It meant stepping into the unknown, something he had always feared. And yet, something about Michael's words stirred something inside him. A quiet strength. A possibility. He tightened his jaw. Okay, he said. Tell me what I need to do. Michael exhaled, as if he had been waiting for that moment. Good. First, we're going to start by breaking the patterns that are controlling you. But Ethan, this won't be easy. Ethan stared at his reflection in the dark screen of his laptop. He could see the exhaustion in his own eyes, the weight of years spent running at full speed without stopping to check where he was headed. But deep down, beneath all of it, there was something else. Something stronger. Determination. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt it again. Ethan sat in silence for a moment after Michael's words. His mind was racing, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just reacting to it. He was observing it. Was it really that simple? Could he just decide to take control, and everything would change? No. He knew it wouldn't be that easy. If it were, he would have done it a long time ago. Michael's voice broke the quiet. I know what you're thinking. You don't believe it's possible yet. That's fine. But let me ask you something, Ethan. What do you do when a strategy isn't working? Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temple. You step back, analyze it, and make adjustments. Exactly. And that's what we're doing here. Your mind is running a bad strategy. It's been feeding you fear and doubt, and you've been letting it. So now, it's time to break the pattern. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. How? Michael hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a deliberate calmness. You have to start small. The first step is awareness. You need to catch your mind when it starts leading you down the wrong path. Every time you hear that voice telling you you're not good enough, that you're going to fail, that something will go wrong, I want you to stop and ask yourself, who is talking right now? Is it me, or is it just a bad habit my mind picked up? Ethan frowned. He had never questioned his thoughts before. They had always felt like truth, not something separate from him. But now, he wondered, how many of these thoughts had he accepted without challenge? How many times had his mind controlled him without him realizing it? All right, Ethan said slowly. So I start paying attention. Then what? Michael's voice took on a sharper edge. Then, you do the one thing your mind doesn't expect. You challenge it. When it tells you something negative, you respond like you would in a business negotiation. If someone came into your office and told you your company was going to fail, would you just accept it? Ethan scoffed. Of course not. I demand proof. Exactly, Michael said. And that's what you need to do with your own thoughts. Demand proof. Ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just fear talking? Ethan sat with that for a moment. It was such a simple concept, yet it felt like something he had never considered before. He had been so used to trusting his thoughts, believing that if his mind told him something, it had to be real. But what if it wasn't? What if his mind had been feeding him lies for years, and he had never questioned them? A strange feeling settled in his chest. Not fear this time. Not doubt. Something different. Curiosity. All right, Ethan said, sitting up straighter. I'll try it. Michael chuckled. Good. But remember, Ethan, this isn't an instant fix. Your mind has been running these patterns for years. It's not going to give up control easily. Ethan nodded, even though Michael couldn't see him. I get it. This is just the beginning. Exactly, Michael said. And now, it's time to see just how much control you really have. Ethan ended the call, staring at his phone for a moment before setting it down. His thoughts were still there, circling like they always did. But something had shifted. He wasn't just listening to them anymore. He was questioning them. The next morning, as soon as Ethan woke up, the familiar feeling of unease crept in. The same thoughts as before, whispering their doubts before he even had a chance to start the day. But this time, he caught them. Before he could get lost in them, he took a deep breath and asked himself, who is talking right now? The question felt strange at first, almost unnatural. But as soon as he asked it, something shifted. He realized something. He didn't actually believe these thoughts. They had just become a habit. A pattern his mind had repeated so many times that he had accepted them as truth. But they weren't truth. They were just noise. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. A small sense of control. A tiny crack in the wall his mind had built around him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The real test, however, came later that day. Ethan had an important meeting with a potential investor, one that could take his company to the next level. Normally, he would have walked into it with complete confidence. But today, his mind was relentless. What if you mess this up? What if they don't believe in your vision? What if this is the beginning of everything falling apart? For a split second, the fear gripped him. He felt his pulse quicken, his chest tighten. But then, he remembered Michael's words. Demand proof. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to pause. He asked himself, is this actually true? Do I have any proof that I'm going to fail? Or is this just fear talking? As soon as he questioned it, the fear lost some of its power. No, he didn't have proof. In fact, he had every reason to believe the opposite. He had prepared for this meeting. He knew his business inside and out. He had faced bigger challenges before and come out stronger. So why was he letting his mind convince him otherwise? Ethan straightened his shoulders, adjusting his tie as he stepped into the conference room. His mind would no longer be the one in control. But just as he was starting to feel that shift, something unexpected happened. The meeting took a turn. The investor wasn't as impressed as Ethan had hoped. The questions became sharper, the doubts clearer. Ethan felt the pressure rising again, his old patterns creeping back in. And that's when he realized, taking control of his mind wasn't going to be a one-time decision. It was going to be a battle. Every single day. And right now, in this moment, he had to decide whether he was going to fight, or let his mind win. The room felt heavier now. Ethan could sense the shift, the unspoken doubts settling in. The investor, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression, leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the polished surface of the table. The silence stretched between them, thick with expectation. Ethan swallowed, forcing himself to stay composed. His mind was already working against him, feeding him worst-case scenarios. He's not interested. He's picking apart everything you've built. You're losing him. The pressure was suffocating. He could feel the familiar tightness in his chest, the creeping sense of failure. His instincts told him to push harder, to prove himself, to fight against the doubts. But something else whispered a different strategy. Stay in control. Ethan took a slow breath, grounding himself. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was observing. He caught the panic rising in his mind, but instead of letting it take over, he did something he had never done before. He paused. Not out of hesitation, but out of control. Instead of rushing to fill the silence, he leaned back slightly, mirroring the investor's posture. He met the man's gaze, steady and unwavering. "You're thinking something," Ethan said, his voice calm. "Tell me." The investor raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by Ethan's confidence. For a moment, he didn't respond, just studying him. Then, he nodded slightly. "Your numbers look solid. Your business model is scalable." But, he let the word hang in the air. Ethan felt the tension coil inside him, but he refused to let it show. "But," the investor exhaled, placing his hands on the table. "I've seen companies like yours before. Smart founders, great execution, promising early growth. And yet, most of them don't survive long-term." Ethan's grip tightened slightly under the table. His mind instantly latched onto the words. "You won't make it. He doesn't believe in you. You're wasting your time." But this time, Ethan didn't let the thoughts take over. Instead, he did exactly what Michael had told him. He challenged them. Was it true? Did this man really believe Ethan's company was destined to fail? Or was he simply testing him, pushing him to see if he would break? Ethan forced himself to see the situation for what it was. Not a rejection, but an opportunity. He leaned forward slightly. "I understand your hesitation," he said smoothly. "But let me ask you something. What's the difference between the companies that fail and the ones that don't?" The investor studied him, intrigued. "A lot of things. Market conditions, leadership, adaptability." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. And you're looking at a team that understands all of that. I don't just have a good idea. I have the ability to execute. I've built this company from the ground up, and I know what it takes to adapt, to pivot, to stay ahead." The investor didn't respond right away, but something in his expression shifted. He was listening. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not doubt, control. The investor leaned back again, considering. The tension was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer Ethan against his own mind. It was Ethan standing firm in the face of uncertainty. But just as he thought he had regained control, his phone vibrated in his pocket. Once. Twice. Urgent. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before ignoring it. But something in his gut told him this wasn't just an ordinary message. The investor finally spoke. "You make a strong case," he said. "I'm interested. But I need more time to consider." Ethan nodded. "Take your time. I'll send over anything else you need." The investor gave a small smile. "You kept your composure. Most people crack under pressure." Ethan smiled back, but his mind was already elsewhere. As soon as he stepped out of the conference room, he pulled out his phone. 2 missed calls. A message from Michael. "Call me now. It's important." A strange feeling settled in Ethan's chest. He quickly called back, pacing the hallway. The phone rang once before Michael picked up. "Ethan." His voice was tense. "We need to talk." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What's going on?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. "You're not the only one who's been dealing with this battle." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Michael exhaled. "I didn't tell you before, because I didn't want to throw you off. But I've been struggling too." Ethan stopped pacing. "Struggling with what?" Michael's voice was lower now, almost hesitant. "Everything I've been teaching you, Ethan, I've been trying to teach myself. I thought I had control over my mind. But lately, it's been fighting back." Ethan felt a chill run through him. He had always seen Michael as the strong one, the one who had already mastered what Ethan was just beginning to understand. But now, hearing the uncertainty in his voice, Ethan realized something. No one was immune to this battle. Not even Michael. Ethan tightened his grip on the phone. "Tell me what's happening." Michael hesitated, then spoke. "It started the same way it did for you. Small doubts, creeping in. But I thought I could handle it. I ignored it, pushed it aside. Then, little by little, it got worse. It started affecting my decisions, my focus. And now it feels like I'm losing control again." Ethan's mind was racing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael sighed. "Because I didn't want you to doubt what I was teaching you. Because I needed to believe I had it figured out." Ethan exhaled slowly. "So what do we do now?" Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, his voice came through, steady but laced with something else, urgency. "We fight," he said. "Together." Ethan felt something shift inside him. The battle he thought he was fighting alone wasn't just his. It was bigger. And now, it wasn't just about saving himself. It was about saving Michael, too. But as that realization settled in, something else crept into his mind, something he hadn't felt before. A whisper of doubt. Because if Michael, the man who had seemed unshakable, was losing control, what chance did Ethan have? Ethan's grip on the phone tightened as Michael's words echoed in his mind. "We fight together." He wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that this battle could be won. But now, for the first time, doubt wasn't just whispering, it was roaring. Michael was supposed to be the expert, the one who had already figured it out. If even he was slipping, then what chance did Ethan have? Was this battle against the mind unwinnable? Was control just an illusion? Michael's voice pulled him back. "Ethan, are you still there?" Ethan blinked, forcing himself to focus. "Yeah. I don't know what to say." Michael sighed on the other end of the line. "I know. I've been where you are. But listen to me. We don't have time to second-guess everything. I need to see you. There's something you need to know." Ethan hesitated. "Michael, what's going on?" Michael didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower, quieter. "Just meet me at my place." I'll explain everything. The call ended. Ethan stared at his phone, unease settling deep in his chest. This wasn't just about controlling thoughts anymore. There was something bigger happening. Something Michael hadn't told him. He had a choice. He could ignore it, pretend none of this was happening, go back to fighting his own battle alone. Or he could go and find out the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. The answer was clear. Ethan grabbed his keys and headed out. The drive to Michael's apartment was a blur, his mind racing the whole way. The city lights streaked past, their glow blurring in his peripheral vision. His thoughts kept looping back to the same question. What wasn't Michael telling him? By the time he pulled up outside Michael's building, the uneasy feeling in his gut had grown stronger. He parked and hurried inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time. When he knocked on Michael's door, there was no immediate answer. A moment later, the door creaked open just enough for Ethan to see Michael's face. He looked different. There was a weight in his eyes, something deeper than exhaustion. He glanced over Ethan's shoulder as if checking for something before pulling the door open wider. "Come in." Ethan stepped inside, and as soon as the door shut behind him, Michael ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "You're not going to believe this." Ethan folded his arms. "Try me." Michael didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to his desk, picked up a folder, and held it out. "I need you to see this." Ethan hesitated before taking it. He flipped it open, and froze. Inside were documents, reports, notes scribbled in hurried handwriting. At first, it all seemed like a mess of disconnected information. But then, his eyes landed on one particular sheet. His name was on it. Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is this?" Michael swallowed hard. "I told you I was struggling too. But it's worse than that. This isn't just about controlling our thoughts anymore, Ethan. Someone else has been trying to control them." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What are you talking about?" Michael gestured at the papers. "I started noticing something a few months ago. Patterns in the way I was thinking. Thoughts that didn't feel like my own. At first, I assumed it was just stress. But then I dug deeper. I started tracking them. And the more I did, the more I realized they weren't random." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying someone planted them?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Not in the way you're thinking. But yes, I think someone has been influencing us, pushing us in certain directions without us even realizing it." Ethan shook his head, his mind reeling. "That's insane. How would that even be possible?" Michael rubbed his face, clearly exhausted. "I don't have all the answers yet. But think about it. How many times have you been absolutely convinced of something? Felt fear, doubt, certainty, without any real reason? How often has your mind worked against you when you needed it the most?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because the truth was, Michael was right. There had been moments, so many moments, where his mind had turned against him without warning. Where doubt had crept in at the worst possible times, sabotaging him. But that was just human nature, wasn't it? Or was it? Michael's voice pulled him back. "I know this sounds impossible. But trust me, Ethan. I have proof." Ethan's hands tightened around the folder. "What kind of proof?" Michael hesitated, then walked to his desk, pulling open a drawer. He took out a small, unmarked envelope and handed it to Ethan. Ethan opened it and pulled out a single photograph. The moment he saw it, his blood ran cold. It was a picture of him. But not just any picture. It was a picture of him sitting in his office, staring at his computer screen, completely unaware. And in the background, through the reflection in the window behind him, someone was watching. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had no idea when this photo had been taken. He had no memory of anyone ever being there. But the evidence was right in front of him. Someone had been watching him. Someone had been influencing him. And now, he had no idea just how deep it went. Ethan's hands trembled as he stared at the photograph. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out every other thought. The realization hit him like a crashing wave. He wasn't just fighting his own mind. Someone had been there, in the shadows, pulling the strings. He looked up at Michael, who was watching him carefully, his expression grim. "Who took this?" Ethan's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Michael shook his head. "I don't know. The envelope was slipped under my door 2 nights ago. No note. No explanation." Ethan's thoughts raced. "You said someone has been influencing us, controlling us. But how? And why?" Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. And I think I found something." He grabbed another paper from the folder and handed it to Ethan. "These are reports from a research project. A psychological experiment." Ethan skimmed the document, his eyes widening as he read. "Cognitive manipulation study. Targeted behavioral influence. Subconscious programming." His heart pounded harder. "This isn't just about us, is it?" Michael shook his head. "No. It's bigger. Much bigger. This project, it wasn't just about studying how thoughts form. It was about testing ways to change them. To plant ideas, to increase self-doubt, to create fear. All without the person realizing it." Ethan's stomach twisted. "And you think we were part of it?" Michael nodded slowly. "Not just us. I think a lot of people have been. The reason your mind has felt like the enemy, the reason you've struggled to stay in control, it's because someone wanted you to struggle." Ethan felt a cold sweat form at the back of his neck. "But why? Who would want to do this?" Michael hesitated, then pulled out one last paper. It was a name. A company. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he read it. He knew this name. He had worked with this company. Trusted them. "This can't be real," Ethan whispered. "This is a mistake." Michael's jaw was tight. "It's real, Ethan. They've been monitoring you, testing how much control they could take over your thoughts. And it's not just you. It's countless others. They've been shaping minds, nudging people into fear, into hesitation, keeping them from reaching their full potential." Ethan felt like the ground was slipping beneath him. His failures, his fears, his self-doubt. Had they ever been his own? Or had someone been feeding them into his mind all along? Michael placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Listen to me. You have a choice now. We can walk away, pretend we never saw this. Or we can fight back." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He had spent years fighting an invisible enemy, blaming himself, questioning his own mind. But now he saw the truth. And he wasn't going to let them win. "Tell me what we need to do," Ethan said, his voice steady. Michael gave a small nod. "It starts with breaking free. If they've been controlling us, we have to show them we're not afraid anymore." Ethan took a deep breath, for the first time feeling something stronger than fear. Determination. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face paled. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Michael turned the phone around. It was a message. A single sentence. "You should have stayed in control." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. They weren't just watching. They knew. Ethan's breath hitched as he stared at the message on Michael's phone. His hands felt clammy, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it. This wasn't just some distant experiment anymore. This was happening now. Someone was watching, listening, and they wanted him to know. Michael locked the screen and exhaled slowly. "We don't have much time." His voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the tension beneath it. "They know we're onto them." Ethan forced himself to think, to push past the fear threatening to take over. "What do we do?" Michael looked at him, eyes dark with determination. "We make sure this doesn't stay buried." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, without another word, Michael moved across the room, grabbed a USB drive from his desk, and shoved it into his laptop. Ethan stepped closer, watching as a series of encrypted files filled the screen. Research data, experiment logs, names, dates. All of it proof that they weren't imagining things. Michael started transferring the files. "We leaked this. We exposed them." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "And what if they stop us before we can?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Then at least we tried." Ethan clenched his fists. He had spent so long letting his own doubts control him, letting fear whisper in his ear and hold him back. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't backing down. The progress bar on the screen filled slowly, inching forward as the files copied over. Every second felt like an eternity. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. Then, just as the transfer completed, a noise echoed from outside the apartment. A sharp, deliberate knock at the door. Ethan and Michael locked eyes. Neither of them moved. Another knock. Harder this time. Ethan's mind raced. Had they been tracked? Had someone followed him here? Michael acted fast. He ejected the USB, shoved it into Ethan's hand, and whispered, "Go." Ethan's eyes widened. "What? I'm not leaving you here." Michael shook his head. "They're not here for both of us. They want to stop this." He gestured toward the drive in Ethan's hand. "Get it out. Get it online." Ethan hesitated for only a second before nodding. He knew what was at stake. Without another word, he slipped out the back door, heart hammering as he hurried down the dimly lit hallway. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay steady, to move with purpose. The moment he stepped outside, the cold night air hit him. He took a breath and kept walking, forcing himself to blend into the crowd. He didn't know if anyone was following. He didn't stop to check. All that mattered was getting the truth out. With each step, something shifted inside him. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had spent too long letting his own mind hold him back, letting doubt win. But now he knew the truth. Fear only had power if you gave it control. He wouldn't let it win anymore. Hours later, he sat in front of his laptop, the USB plugged in, the files ready. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. A deep breath. A final moment of hesitation. Then, he pressed upload. The files spread like wildfire. Within minutes, people were seeing what he and Michael had uncovered. The truth was out. And no matter what happened next, he had won a battle that mattered, not just against them, but against himself. The next morning, Ethan checked his phone. The world was already reacting. People were asking questions, demanding answers. He had no idea what the consequences would be, but for the first time in a long time, he felt free. A message popped up on his screen. It was from Michael. Just 2 words. "We did it." Ethan exhaled and allowed himself to smile. Maybe the war wasn't over, but he had taken back control. And that was the first step to winning.